Hey Little Grimage, Chapter 1, The Glazed Invasion. Crumfist Prime was a miserable rock in the segmentum obscurus covered in fungal plains, stale air, and the stench of spoiled promethium. The Ork Clan known as the Goo-Boyz had infested it, turning every mountain into a scrap fortress and every crater into a deep-fried pit of green chaos. Their war boss, Snagger Sizzletooth, had declared that Crumfist Prime would become the galaxy's largest snack yard. Unfortunately for him, two of the strangest Space Marine chapters ever created were already inbound: the Donut Legion and the Blunt Angels. When the skies tore open with the sound of thunder and sugar glaze, the Orks looked up, shielding their beady eyes from the raining debris. From drop pods shaped like pastry boxes emerged pink and white Space Marines, their pauldrons decorated with donuts and sprinkles gleaming like holy relics. The Donut Legion's battle cry echoed, "By the glaze, we serve!" Right beside them, a haze of incense and slow-moving smoke rolled across the battlefield. The Blunt Angels, clad in calming green with golden trim, emerged in formation, though formation might be a generous term. Many were casually walking, their bolters slung over shoulders, chatting about vibes and chill tactics. Their captain, Seraph Kushariel, adjusted his yellow-trimmed halo helm and muttered, "We fight when the mood strikes, brothers." At their side stood the Donut Legion's commander, Captain Cyrus Glazeborn, whose armor was caked in frosting thicker than most ceramite plates. Together, they surveyed the horizon, where Ork war trucks spewed exhaust and laughter. Cyrus cracked his knuckles. "We're not leaving until this place smells like victory, or a bakery fire." The first clash was a spectacle of utter nonsense and grim majesty. Donut Legion apothecaries hurled exploding crullers at charging Orks, shouting, "Taste divinity!" while Blunt Angel devastators slowly lined up their shots, missing half of them due to laughter. The Orks, in turn, fired back with grease cannons and roared, "We's gonna deep fry the pink ones!" As the battle descended into chaos, one Donut Legion sergeant, Sergeant Custado the Powdered, declared he would duel the war boss personally. "By sugar and spice and everything bright," he cried, charging into a cloud of powdered sugar and shrapnel. A Blunt Angel nearby, Sergeant Blazus the Chilled, shook his head. "That dude's too baked for this timeline," he muttered, raising his bolter. The Blunt Angels and Donut Legion fought side by side, and despite their utter absurdity, they began to win. Orks slipped on icing puddles. Blunt Angel flamers filled the air with the smell of roasted fungus. The Orks' morale began to crumble faster than day-old pastry. By dusk, the first phase of Crumfist Prime's liberation was complete. Captain Cyrus looked over the battlefield, frosting dripping from his gauntlets. "Brothers," he said solemnly, "today we glazed them all." And Captain Kushariel, lighting a blessed incense stick, replied, "Yeah, man, that's some sweet retribution." Chapter 2, The Battle of Batteridge Pass. The war for Crumfist Prime had only just begun. After the initial success of the Glazed Invasion, the combined forces of the Donut Legion and the Blunt Angels set their sights on a narrow stretch of land known as Batteridge Pass, a canyon thick with syrup rivers, smoking craters, and the constant smell of burnt Ork machinery. Warboss Snagger Sizzletooth had fallen back to the pass, determined to hold the high ground. His mech boys had constructed greasy turrets, oil traps, and towering banners made of deep-fried skin. Above them, a crude sign hung, "No pink or green gits allowed." Captain Cyrus Glazeborn, the frosting-covered commander of the Donut Legion, surveyed the pass with a serious squint through his frosting-streaked visor. "They've fortified their snack yard," he muttered, "and it's time we redecorate." Beside him, Captain Seraph Kushariel of the Blunt Angels slowly exhaled incense smoke and nodded. "We shall redecorate, with high-caliber enlightenment, my glazed brother." As the two commanders planned, a sudden rumble shook the canyon. Ork war buggies screeched down the syrupy slopes, tires flinging molten sugar. Behind them, mobs of boys roared, their choppers glinting in the caramel haze. The Donut Legion opened fire first. Pink and white Marines advanced in tight formation, bolters blazing in rhythm, every impact puffing explosions of powdered sugar across the valley. The Orks were caught between laughter and confusion. "They shooting sprinkles at us," one yelled, before being vaporized by a frosted plasma bolt. Meanwhile, the Blunt Angels fought in their own unique way. Calmly, deliberately, they marched forward, chanting low hymns and igniting incense as bullets whistled by. Sergeant Blazus the Chilled dragged a wounded battle brother to safety, mumbling, "Brother, breathe. The Emperor provides, and the Emperor pre-rolls." The Orks, though numerous, were losing ground fast. Their engines sputtered from syrup flooding, and the Donut Legion's flamers turned their defences into flaming candy sculptures. At the centre of the battle, Captain Cyrus led a charge, wielding his relic weapon, the Sugar Scepter, a massive two-handed hammer that glowed with molten caramel energy. Each strike melted armour and caramelized Ork flesh. "Taste the Emperor's sweetness!" he roared as his hammer came down, shattering Snagger's elite Nob Squad. Captain Kushariel, meanwhile, entered the fray like a serene storm. His relic weapon, the Incendium Chalice, unleashed purifying fire laced with aromatic fumes. Every Ork that fell did so half-burned and half-confused, muttering, "Smells nice, though." By dusk, the battlefield was silent, save for the hissing of syrup rivers and the gentle hum of a Blunt Angel choir humming victory hymns off-key. As the smoke cleared, Cyrus turned to Kushariel. "We've taken Batteridge Pass. The Orks will think twice before setting up another snack yard." Kushariel smiled beneath his helmet. "Brother, they never think twice. But that's why we love them." The two commanders bumped armoured fists, frosting and ash mingling. The Battle of Batteridge Pass was over. But deep beneath the surface, the Orks were not finished. In the dark tunnels below, War Boss Snagger Sizzletooth's mech boys were building something enormous. Something loud. Something deep-fried. The war was far from over. Chapter 3. The Siege of the Sticky Spire. When the smoke settled over Batteridge Pass, the sweet-scented silence didn't last long. Reports arrived from the eastern marshlands. Ork survivors were retreating toward a massive structure that pierced the sky like a melted candle. The Sticky Spire. Once a refinery built by the Imperium to process glucose fuel, it had been converted into a fortress by Warboss Snagger Sizzletooth. The Orks had coated its walls in hardened caramel, making it nearly impregnable. Captain Cyrus Glazeborn of the Donut Legion and Captain Seraph Kushariel of the Blunt Angels stood before a hollow display of the spire, its syrup-glazed surface gleaming ominously. Kushariel slowly exhaled a thick cloud of incense vapour. "Brother," he said, "that tower looks like a diabetic's nightmare." Cyrus nodded gravely. "Then it shall be their last meal." The siege of the Sticky Spire began at dawn. The Donut Legion deployed from frosting-covered drop pods, their landing shaking the caramel plains. Every impact sent sugary shockwaves through the Ork lines. Pink-armoured Marines stormed forward, their glaze cannons splattering boiling frosting across the walls. Above them, banners fluttered proudly, embroidered with donuts, dripping syrup, and the words, for the Emperor's sweet tooth. Meanwhile, the Blunt Angels advanced in their characteristic haze of calm and incense. Their incense launchers fired rounds of sedating vapours that caused orcs to hallucinate giant pastries chasing them across the battlefield. "See?" murmured Sergeant Blasius the Chilled, firing another round. "Fear is the mind killer. Also, so is hunger." The orcs responded with typical enthusiasm. A countercharge led by Snagger's personal unit, the Grease Jaws. They rolled out grease-belching trucks, flinging barrels of boiling oil down the slopes. One truck, painted neon green with "Eat crump, not kale" scrawled across the side, crashed directly into the donut lines. The Marines barely flinched. Captain Cyrus raised the sugar scepter once more, slamming it into the ground. A wave of caramelized shock energy rippled out, freezing orcs mid-charge in a sticky amber. From above, Blunt Angel librarians began chanting. Not prayers, but a strange, meditative rap about patience, courage, and snack time. Hours passed. The battlefield transformed into a surreal blend of molten syrup and firelight. At last, Captain Kushariel led the final assault. His blade, the Incendium Chalice, burned so bright that the caramel shell cracked under the heat. Donut Marines charged through the breach, pink and white banners whipping in the steam. Inside, the spire was chaos incarnate. Conveyor belts pouring sugar, vats of molten caramel, and orcs slipping everywhere. Cyrus fought like a confectionery god, swinging his hammer through walls and enemies alike. "The Emperor's diet is vengeance!" he roared, smiting Snagger's mech boys one by one. Finally, in the spire's molten core, Warboss Snagger appeared. His jaw gleamed with steel teeth, his belly a cauldron of bubbling oil. "Oi, you pink pansies! I'll deep fry your heads!" he screamed. Cyrus and Kushariel charged together, one blazing with caramel light, the other wreathed in holy smoke. The duel shook the tower. Snagger's claw caught Cyrus's shoulder, tearing through armour. But the donut captain responded with a crushing hammer strike that shattered the orc's jaw. Kushariel finished it with a gout of purifying flame, melting the warboss's crude armour to slag. As Snagger fell, the tower began to collapse. Caramel melting, machinery exploding, sugar fire spreading everywhere. The two captains emerged from the flames, victorious, but coated in molten frosting. Behind them, the spire melted into the marsh, leaving behind a bubbling crater that smelled suspiciously like creme brulee. The sticky spire had fallen, and though the orcs would return, this victory was one for the legends, the sweetest war ever fought in the name of the Emperor. Chapter 4: The Crust Wars. When the sticky spire fell, the Donut Legion and Blunt Angels believed the battle for Crumfist Prime was over. But orcs are like mold. They grow back, stronger, smellier, and louder. Deep in the molten marshes of melted caramel, surviving mech boys and weird boys gathered around the corpse of Warboss Snagger Sizzletooth. They plugged jumper cables into his fried jaw and whispered chants of "Wah" and "Waffles." Moments later, lightning crackled through the sugar clouds. Snagger's eyes snapped open, glowing neon green. Reborn as Mega Warboss Snagger Sizzletooth the Twice Fried, he bellowed, "The Crust War starts now!" The return of the fried horde. The orcs came rolling across the syrup plains on ramshackle vehicles that hissed and sputtered with fryer smoke. Their war engines were coated in burnt dough, their cannons firing blobs of molten batter. Their banners read, "Deep fry everything." In orbit, aboard the Blunt Angels battle barge Eternal Chill, Captain Seraph Kushariel meditated amid clouds of incense. The air shimmered with calm energy until a servitor interrupted. "Captain, reports indicate the Orks are baking something." "Sir, let them bake," Kushariel replied, exhaling serenity. "Then we shall feast upon their hubris." On the ground, the Donut Legion was already engaging. Captain Cyrus Glazeborn stood knee-deep in sticky mud, surveying the horizon. "They've evolved," he muttered. "They've gone from batter to bread." The Orks had indeed constructed a monstrous war engine, the Crust Fortress, a rolling citadel shaped like a loaf of burnt bread, bristling with cannons that fired butter bombs. At its heart stood Snagger himself, clad in new armor made of frying pans and toaster plates. His new power claw sparked with electricity and bits of jam. The storm of sugar and fire. The Donut Legion launched the assault first. Drop pods crashed like falling pastries, splattering syrup across the battlefield. Marines poured out, guns blazing sugar-coated death. Their flamers spat molten glaze, their chainswords hummed with frosting energy. Above them, the blunt angels descended in hazy glory. Kushariel and his warriors rode incense-powered jump packs, trailing golden smoke and calm hymns. "Brothers," Kushariel spoke through Vox, his tone soft yet commanding. "Remember, inner peace, outer carnage." The first clash was chaos incarnate. The Crust Fortress opened fire, unleashing a barrage of butter bombs that coated half the battlefield in slippery doom. Donut Marines skidded, spun, and kept fighting. Sergeant Cruller 8 used his fallen bolter as a skateboard, gliding across molten syrup to decapitate an Ork knob. Nearby, the Blunt Angels formed a meditative phalanx, chanting their war prayer. "Through calmness, the hit lands harder. Through focus, we find the munchies. Through serenity, we smoke the green." Every line ended with a bolter volley. The duel of the twice fried. In the heart of the chaos, Captain Cyrus met Mega Warboss Snagger again. The Ork towered even larger now, his armor glowing red-hot. "I'm back, you pink cupcake," he howled, slamming his claw down. Cyrus barely parried, frosting spraying from his hammer with each impact. "You were overcooked the first time," he growled. "Time to scrape you from the pan." Their battle raged across the burning plains. Snagger swung with such force that each strike sent waves of melted sugar rippling for miles. Cyrus countered with divine confectionery fury, his sugar scepter glowing brighter with every blow. As the duel peaked, Kushariel joined the fray. He leapt through a wave of butterfire, his armor reflecting molten gold. "Brother Cyrus," he called, "mind if I season the kill?" "By all means," Cyrus replied, ducking a claw strike. Together, the two captains struck in perfect unison, hammer and flame, frosting and serenity. Snagger exploded into a shower of molten grease and jam, his final words lost in the sound of sizzling doom. The aftermath. The Crust Fortress crumbled. Orks fled in confusion, many slipping into syrup pools never to be seen again. As the smoke cleared, Kushariel removed his helmet, face calm despite the caramel dripping down his pauldrons. Cyrus turned to him. "Think they'll be back?" Kushariel smiled faintly. "There's always another course, brother." And above them, the sun broke through the sugary clouds, gleaming off their pink and green armor. Two absurd champions of the Emperor, united by frosting and fate. Chapter 5. Operation Frosting Shield. Crumfist Prime's crust had cooled. The smoke of the crust wars drifted into the molasses skies. Both the Donut Legion and the Blunt Angels licked their wounds, literally in the Donut Legion's case, believing the conflict over. But from the northern syrup seas rose a new horror. Not green this time, but sickly teal, frothing with fermented sugar gas. The Ork Weirdboys had fused their dead with dough, creating an army of ferment boys, zombified orcs risen from the sticky remains of fallen friars. They marched toward the confectionery metropolis of Sugaria Magna, the last sweet stronghold of imperial pastry production on Crumfist Prime. If the orcs took it, all frosting reserves would fall, and the Emperor's supply of morale-boosting rations would collapse. Captain Cyrus Glazeborn stood atop the sugar spire, surveying the horizon through a monocle carved from hardened caramel. "They're back," he muttered, "and they've gone stale." Lieutenant Jellymane approached, carrying a data slate made of chocolate steel. "Reports indicate the ferment boys are bubbling, sir." Cyrus grimaced. "Then we deploy Operation Frosting Shield. Prepare the glaze cannons." Meanwhile, aboard the Blunt Angels' orbiting barge, the Serene Ember, Captain Seraph Kushariel received the same summons. His response was as measured as ever. "If they hunger for war, we shall feed them calmness," and several megatons of purified sugar fire. Within hours, the skies filled with drop pods once again. This time they glistened like frosted comets, burning through the sugar-heavy clouds as they descended toward Sugaria Magna. The city was a wonder to behold. Gothic cathedrals made of candy glass, bridges formed from hardened caramel, and statues of imperial saints carved in pure nougat. But now, the streets were lined with hastily erected barricades made from overturned vending shrines. As the ferment boys approached, the ground trembled with the gurgling of their yeast engines. The smell of rot and burnt sugar filled the air. Then the orcs charged, a bubbling wave of mouldy flesh and half-risen bread, their battle cry a sickly gargle of "Wado!" The Donut Legion opened fire first. Bolters barked, spraying sugar shrapnel rounds that exploded into glittering clouds of destruction. Marines shouted absurd battle hymns over the Vox. "By the glaze, we purify! The Emperor bakes!" Cyrus himself waded through the carnage, his sugar scepter glowing with righteous caramel light. He swung it like a rolling pin from hell, crushing one ferment boy after another, icing their corpses in sweet, holy death. Through the chaos, the Blunt Angels descended like green smoke from heaven. Seraph Kushariel led the charge, his robes fluttering amid explosions. His marines advanced in perfect formation, calm as monks, brutal as 1,000 oven fires. "Remember, brothers," Kushariel spoke over the Vox, "maintain inner stillness, aim true, and if you find a donut on the ground, do not eat it." His words were instantly ignored by a Donut Legion trooper who grabbed a stray pastry mid-battle and shouted, "It's still good!" moments before being vaporized by a butter grenade. The combined counterattack was magnificent. Incense smoke met frosting vapor, bolters roared, and holy fire turned the night into a psychedelic inferno. By dawn, the ferment boys lay in heaps of steaming dough, their corpses bubbling down into puddles of sour syrup. When the smoke cleared, the great candy domes of Sugaria Magna still stood. Operation Frosting Shield had succeeded. The surviving Marines gathered in the plaza of St. Cinnabon's Cathedral, surrounded by pools of caramel and half-melted orc armor. Captain Cyrus clapped Kushariel on the shoulder. "You smell like victory." "And cinnamon," Kushariel replied. "Inner peace and pastry often share the same aroma." They laughed, a sound somewhere between thunder and sugar crackle, as the sun rose over the frosting slick horizon. Above them, the banners of the Donut Legion and Blunt Angels waved together in the sticky wind. In glaze we trust. Chapter 6. The Siege of Caramel Spire. The syrup seas boiled as the orc horde returned, this time angrier, stickier, and somehow even dumber. At their head roared War Chief Guzag the Syrup Lord, his body encased in layers of molten caramel armor so thick it dripped like lava. He bellowed across the plains of frosting, "The spire's mine, you sweet-tasting gits!" The Caramel Spire, a towering bastion of sugar steel and sacred confectionery circuitry, was the heart of Sugaria Magna. Within its swirling caramel walls pulsed the holy reactor of glucose, the core energy source that powered every glaze cannon and pastry forge in the hemisphere. If the Orks captured it, every frosting engine across the sector would shut down, and worse, the Imperium would lose its sweetest fuel. The syrup cannon. The Orks' weapon was an atrocity to engineering and common sense alike. A colossal syrup cannon stitched together from vats, piping, and the stolen guts of refinery towers. It hurled molten caramel projectiles the size of drop pods. The first shot hit the outskirts of the spire and coated half the defence lines in boiling sugar. Captain Cyrus Glazeborn stood on the battlements, frosting crackling on his armour. "We need to cool that cannon before it turns us into candy." Lieutenant Jellymane squinted through a candy scope. "Sir, it's powered by fermented dough and fire-breathing squigs." "Then we burn the bakery," Cyrus growled, loading sugar crystal rounds into his weapon. The Descent of Serenity. Above, the serene ember hovered, the Blunt Angel's dreadnought barge. Its engines hummed like a meditative chant as Captain Seraph Kosheriel watched the battle unfold. "This place," he said calmly, "smells like damnation." And frosting. At his command, the Blunt Angels descended once more, their golden capes glinting in the caramel storm. They struck the Ork ranks like emerald thunder, flamers roaring with incense and napalm. Kosheriel himself wielded the incendium chalice, a flaming relic blade so hot it caramelized Orks with every swing. The air turned thick with sugar smoke and war cries. "By the leaf and the loaf! The Emperor's kitchen never closes!" The sweet counterstrike. Cyrus led the Donut Legion's counter-assault up the spire's caramel walls using magnetic boots and blind confidence. Bolter fire tore through Ork ranks as syrup splattered like blood rain. Halfway up, Cyrus was nearly struck by a molten toffee boulder. It missed by inches and vaporized a pastry shrine below. "Sweet mercy!" he shouted. "That one almost ruined my glaze." The Marines rallied atop the spire's crown. From above, the battlefield looked like a chaotic painting, pink and green armour clashing against waves of bubbling brown. Kosheriel landed beside Cyrus in a plume of incense smoke, his calm face barely visible beneath the steam. "The syrup flows too strong," Kosheriel warned. "Then we'll stir harder," Cyrus grinned. Together, they unleashed the spire's secret weapon, the Glaze Tempest, a storm generator that released a hurricane of pressurized powdered sugar. The winds shredded the Ork lines and clogged the syrup cannon's vents. The massive gun wheezed, sputtered, and finally exploded into a golden cloud of caramelized doom. Aftermath of stickiness. When the last echoes of battle faded, the plains of Crumfist Prime were coated in a thick, shimmering glaze. Orks lay entombed in sugar crystal. The caramel spire still stood, dripping, steaming, but victorious. Captain Cyrus leaned on his scepter, exhausted but smug. "That's how you frost a cake, boys." Kosheriel simply nodded. And thus, sweetness prevails once more. They raised their banners, one pink and white, the other green and gold, fluttering together in the caramel wind. Below, the surviving Marines chanted, their voices echoing across the syrup plains. Bake. Burn. Believe. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more awesome custom lore content.